Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the journey of the planet of communication, the winged messenger Mercury, through its 3 retrograde phases in the sign of Taurus in the months of April and May 2023. Now, of course, Mercury retrograde itself is hugely influential, but we also have the pre-retrograde shadow period when Mercury is slowing down, and also it doesn't emerge from the post-retrograde phase until the end of May. So hugely influential, particularly when the focus has been so much on resources, the cost of living, everyday money, and also in some ways our sense of self-worth. If you are a returning visitor, thank you so much for joining me once more. If you're new to my channel, it's great to have you with us. I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. This is very much a community and I interact with any comments that you may make. Also, if you'd like to expand your knowledge of natal astrology and gain searing insights in terms of how your own personal birth data unfolds in terms of your life journey, please see beneath this video for my very special offer. No 2 charts are the same, totally unique to you. So I just want to sketch out how I'm going to structure the video. First up, I'll give you the dates. I'm also going to share with you when the last Mercury retrograde concluded and when the next one begins, but also what the overall meaning of Mercury is in year 2023, because it does have a consistent theme. Also, what are the areas, the themes that Mercury impacts? I'm going to share those with you. But also the snags. We know Mercury retrograde can create some, but there are also potentials, and those tend to get downplayed somewhat. We also need to look at the event chart based on the solar chart that we can all collectively relate to, but also the natal chart too. The Moon and Uranus are almost side by side as Mercury goes retrograde, and that's going to be particularly influential. And then I'm going to share each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your sun or the ascendant. The choice is yours. So Mercury begins its retrograde proper on the 21st of April. It concludes that retrograde period on the 15th of May, but the pre-retrograde shadow period begins on the 7th of April. The post-retrograde shadow period concludes on the 31st of May. And how this works, and it really is quite fascinating, when the retrograde begins, Mercury is at 15 degrees and 37 minutes. But when the pre-retrograde shadow begins, Mercury is at 5 degrees and 50. When the retrograde ends, it's back at 5 degrees 50. And when the post-retrograde shadow comes to its end at the end of May, then we're back at 15 degrees 37. So really quite a lot of synchronicity in the way this works. So what are the themes of Mercury itself? Well, it's very much to do in the sign of Taurus with resources and our self-worth and what our values are. Also, it can be to do with everyday money. Now, because Mercury can be very much to do with electronic media, online transactions will need some particular care. But Mercury itself also governs distribution, and in the sign of Taurus, very much to do with food distribution. Now, in the United Kingdom, we have had some problems with food distribution already this year, and also with people just moving around freely because of border controls, industrial disputes. And again, Mercury governs contracts, discussions, but also in the sign of Taurus, also disagreements. But also Mercury is influential in terms of ticketing, and travel. So if we're wanting to buy or sell anything, I think we need to take great care, be very precise in our approach, because remember, Mercury is not just about communication through its rulership of Gemini, it's also about precision through its rulership of Virgo. Now, the snags that could come to the fore in a big way could be continuing industrial disputes, which have been, and also political disputes where people are unhappy about how things are developing in their own countries. I think there is the potential for more of those, but we could see some technology failures, particularly linked to the banking sector. So, we have had situations where there's complete outages and people can't withdraw their money from the hole in the wall. That kind of stuff can happen. And of course, Mercury retrograde can be about misunderstandings. So misunderstandings about differences of opinion in terms of our values is entirely possible, but those crosswires could also be just straightforwardly about money. What about the potentials? Well, Mercury retrograde gives us the chance to rethink, to rework things. If something we've set up isn't reaping a tangible reward, the second house is very much about what we can feel and see. It's a material position for Mercury to be going through this phase. So we need to recalibrate, reschedule, revise. All those re's are really important. And obviously Re is in retrograde as well. So we have an opportunity to be quite fluid, but because the sign of Taurus is a fixed sign and can resist change, it's important that we are prepared to be flexible in our approach. Also, we're living in an incredibly quick moving world environment. And one of the things I would really stress is that the sign of Taurus is, of course, Earth, but our connection to the earth has become much more fragile, and also our use of earthly resources much more flippant. Consumerism is really the order of the day. So this would be a great opportunity to recycle, to upcycle, to declutter, but in a sensible way. If there are ways that, if we're wanting to buy some new clothes, it's probably better to buy those that will last longer if we can afford it, or perhaps even buy those that are being repurposed. Now, that's something that the whole vintage movement is really exciting, but it does have that side product of being good for the planet too. So I think our awareness to how we use consumer products, and often we will be guided by price, and for some people that is absolutely essential. But if we can reuse things we already have, grow food from scratch ourselves, make food from scratch rather than using stuff that perhaps is being pre-prepared, which obviously can be attractive at times if we're tired, short of time, but we're being asked to really become much more mindful of the world environment that we are in, and how we use money and how we use our resources. Now, the last retrograde ended on the 18th of January, but there's going to be 2 retrogrades this year in the sign of Capricorn, which is where that one occurred, and that's because we have another one coming in December, but it will rewind into the sign of Sagittarius. So we have just 5 days at the end of the year where we have some fire, because the next retrograde that will occur will be on the 23rd of August in the sign of Virgo. So you can see there's a theme for this year, and it's all about resources. Think of the pentacles or the coins in tarot and you'll get the idea. It's all about how we can make the most of what we have. Now, as I mentioned before, the pre-retrograde shadow begins on the 7th of April when Mercury is at 5 degrees and 50 minutes. But the retrograde itself begins on the 21st of April. And of course, that comes the day after we've had a solar eclipse, and also the sun moves from the sign of Aries and into the sign of resources, Taurus. So if I just share on the screen now the event chart based on the collective. So this is based on taking the vernal point as 0 degrees as the first house. And you can see we do have Chiron and Jupiter in that first house. Those can be very enterprising energies, because Chiron can prompt us in a way to think about how we can help each other. Can of course be very healing, but you can see the Sun in house 2, the sign of Taurus, very close to the North Node. So we're in a very symbolic phase, because on the 13th of July the North Node reverses into the sign of Aries, and of course the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 20th, is in Aries, and we had that new moon which occurred on the 21st of March. So a lot of potential for new beginnings, but Pluto, that big outlier, is there up at the top in the 11th house, squaring up with the Sun. So if we think about this event, I feel that we're being asked to think about our long-term future in terms of how we all connect to each other, the group that comes through Pluto in Aquarius, but also the resources with the Sun, the North Node, the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, because you can see this event is happening with the Moon at 15 degrees in the sign of Taurus, but there also is Mercury. So the Moon and Mercury are almost side by side. We're talking literally about 20 minutes apart. And Uranus is in the mix as well, which creates uncertainty. So I feel for a sign like Taurus, where of course the Moon is exalted, like stability, but this all points towards something that's changing at quite the pace. And the ruler of the sign of Taurus is of course Venus in house 3 in the solar chart. Very chatty, very flirty, very sociable in the sign of Gemini, but it's in a tight right angle with Saturn, the Earth ruler of the sign of Capricorn, very much to do with structures, and you can see that's in house 12. So I think the way that we use resources, which can be in terms of enjoying life particularly, we're being asked to become much more conscious of where we can reuse things, I feel. So Venus is challenged on this event, the ruler of the sign of Taurus, but also we have Uranus and the Moon. They've both separated from Mercury at this point, but they're very, very close. So we're talking about a restlessness, but this could lead to a raising in consciousness about the importance of looking after the planet much more carefully. We do, though, have Mars, very strident Mars in the sign of Cancer, where it's in full in the 4th house of our environment, and that is also clashing with Chiron. So we can be hedonistic. You know, Jupiter in Aries in the 1st house, we can do exactly what we want, and we can continue to do it, but it is becoming more and more clear that we need to be more mindful. Now let's just explore this in terms of the natal chart, because it does, in terms of Placidus, because it does give us some lots of other information. The ascendant is in Cancer. Mars moves into house 1, which is very swashbuckling and defensive in Cancer and resistant to being told what to do. But you can see that there's a whole plethora of influences: Chiron, Jupiter, the Sun, the North Node, the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, Mercury, the Moon, and Uranus, all in house 11, which is the collective. And what about Pluto? Well, that's in house 8. That's deep finance. Pluto can lead to revelations, but also we're going to find out more about corruption, or the way that money has been filtered off to avoid tax by very, very wealthy entities, perhaps criminal entities, perhaps states that have used offshore trust and so on, and of course very wealthy individuals. But Pluto clashing with the Sun in Taurus, just in house 11, points towards, again, more things coming out into the open in terms of the lack of moral, not necessarily in the terms of being very prissy and righteous, but we're talking about, you know, really huge amounts of money have been squirreled away, which is therefore not necessarily going to be subject to the same level of taxation. But whatever our circumstances, it seems that the people right at the sharp end are the ones who are paying a lot more for electricity and gas and food. And remember, food is governed by the sign of Taurus, so we are going to see some disruption, I feel, around food distribution, and also some concern still about the cost of living, although I do feel that there is going to be some shakeout by the autumn in the northern hemisphere, the spring in the south, which will see to inflation coming down. So that gives you a flavour. You can see that this is a seminal time for people kind, and please stay with me now as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs and give you a flavour of what you can expect through those 7-8 weeks from the 7th of April right through to the end of May for your sign, in terms of the influences that Mercury through its retrograde phases has in the sign of Taurus. And for you, Aries, it is very much about those resources, but it's also about how you feel about yourself. Is your sense of self intact? Of course, we've had the Sun Chiron conjunction in your sign, which occurred on the 5th of April, which really was an opportunity, particularly with the Libran full moon in opposition to the Sun in your sign across the 5th and the 6th of April, to really think about, how worthy you have felt that you have been. And I feel that that's going to be something that is going to be tested over the next 7 or 8 weeks, but it also can be a time when you can be incredibly enterprising in your approach. It's just that Mars, your ruler, being in the sign of Cancer, is asking you just to watch that you're not being triggered and reacting to situations, being rather too sensitive if someone sees something in a different way to you. At the end of the day, people are perfectly entitled to have a different viewpoint, and because Taurus is very much about values, I feel that you may encounter some people who do see things differently to you. However, the solar eclipse gave you a late opportunity on the back of that new moon to really think about how you can take your individual ideas and strategies, energy, enthusiasm, and actually make it work for you in some kind of alchemy way to give you a return. So you'll be wanting to see things shaping up by the end of May, which creates a greater, more substantive foundation for you to take your next steps forwards from. Taurus, for you, well, this is pretty exciting in some ways. Of course, Mercury retrograde can be very frustrating, and it may be that something that you want to happen at the start of the process, around about the second week of April, and you can really set your heart on it, but by the end of May you may have a different relationship to this prospect simply because of the information that you've quarried. And remember, Pluto for you is in house 10, very much to do with your worldly interactions. And I feel that because it is squaring up to the Sun in your sign in such a powerful way, if your Sun is right at the start of Taurus, you're going to feel the impact of this event in a very potent way. In fact, Pluto is going to have a big impact on you over the next couple of years. And it's kind of saying that your worldly role is going to transform. So I feel that you may try some things that are exciting, that are a bit different, very enterprising, and you may stub your toe, and you could find yourself being mightily pent up with frustration if it doesn't flow along at the speed you want. But remember, your great talent is your stickability. I'm not sure if that's an official word. I think it might be used in soccer terms, but your ability to hang in there and sustain your effort is one of your great gifts. But I think that Uranus and Moon combination being on Mercury, particularly if your Sun is right in the centre of the sign of Taurus, I feel that there may be a push to make some big changes in your situation, and it may be something that you could find yourself a little bit reluctant to go with, or if you do go with it, it just seems like a maelstrom. Everything's changing all at once. I wouldn't necessarily call it like the Tower card in tarot, which can be obviously very challenging, but I feel that something can happen quite quickly, and then it might not work out, but something else can come in very quickly and work out marvellously well. So I think things are going to be very fluid, and don't be surprised if you're speaking a lot, sharing ideas, moving around a lot with Mars in the mix. But with your ruler Venus in your second solar house, if you are someone who does start to experience a bit of stress, you could find your comfort in those calorific goodies. So if you have set yourself some targets around, fitness or diet regimes this year, Venus in the sign of Gemini could see you mightily tempted to have some treats from time to time. Gemini, for you, this event occurs, and of course Mercury is your ruler, in house 12. Now Uranus has been impacting this for you full time since March 2019. Again, it depends exactly where your sun is or other inner planets, how this has worked out for you. A lot of Gemini people have been feeling a lot of stress, particularly around financial matters. Now Pluto has moved into the 9th house, it probably has given you a lot more clarity, particularly if you're born right at the start of Gemini. And I feel that perhaps new information's coming in or perhaps someone's acting as a guide, or steering you in some ways in a positive way. You're working together. The knowledge they have is really playing out in your situation splendidly well. But if you've got anything you need to tell to a wider audience, Pluto's certainly pushing you to do so. But it's just saying in its square with the sun, don't try too hard. If you try to be dominating in your approach to sharing those ideas, you could meet resistance, and the resistance could be quite psychological. All this energy in the 12th house may see you needing to de-stress at times and find some ways to do that gently, whether it's through breathing exercise, swimming, a walk in nature, tuning out a little bit, because your mind is often so active. It is going to be important from this event to be aware that some things may be wanting to come up from your subconscious, and you may not necessarily want to look at them because there's something exciting or intriguing that's engaging your mind. Very Gemini-like. Now Cancer, for you, this event occurs in house 11. Your long-term plan is subject to change, and that change could initially be quite challenging, even a bit scary. But actually, if you go with it, you could end up in a better position by the end of May, but it may surprise you what that position is. The potential for separation from something that isn't working around your emotional life is strong, simply because Uranus is applying to that moon position so tightly. There's only about 2 degrees between them. So I feel you are going to be very restless. You can also find yourself being much more idealistic, and with Mars in your sign and on the event chart, the ascendant also in Cancer, you want your voice to be heard. Good for you. And if you're someone who's a campaigner, an advocate, someone who has a sense of what's happening to the collective, and you feel passionate about it, you'll want to speak out. But of course Mercury can lead to those misunderstandings, and if you're waiting for information from others, it may get snagged, be slow coming, which can be amazingly frustrating. But the big picture for you, I feel, is very strong, but I feel there is the need for some change. I think because Uranus is so involved in this event, you could break away from a long-term friend or a group of people that you've been associated with if you feel that their vibe doesn't really work for you any longer. Now Leo, for you, the cluster of energy that we have in the natal event chart is all in house 10 for you, which is very exciting in terms of career. But there may be something that you've set your sights on in terms of a goal or ambition, and you may go for it and you may get it, but equally it may just not quite work out. Maybe for some Leos there is going to be the need to retrain or redeploy old skills in a fresh way. That process can be a little bit choppy. I think because Uranus and the Moon are so close to Mercury, you may find that a line manager, an employer, a potential employer could be unpredictable, changeable, and that's not something that generally you appreciate greatly. You like to be really respected, but I think it's just worth being very realistic that with Mars in your 12th house, your emotions are a little bit up and down at the present time, and will continue to be so until Mars makes that transition into your sign in May. Now Virgo, of course, Mercury is your ruling planet, and in the sign of Taurus, it's house 9, international affairs, contracts, long distance travel, can be to do with philosophy, and it could also be to do with applying for some kind of course. And you know, Uranus being so close to Mercury in a retrograde, something is going to cause you a need to separate yourself from obligations and responsibilities, something that you have a strong understanding of your need to be loyal and, you know, be disciplined and reliable. These are things that you really identify with very strongly, but I feel there's a big astral celestial gust of wind that's pushing you to be much more provocative and stick out for what you need in terms of your independence, space and freedom. That can be in terms of your immediate environment, it could be in terms of wanting to get out into the wider world more, but I think it is possible there could be some snags around a contract or longer term plan, or something to do with a travel expedition, and you just need to make sure that you've got your plan B and your plan C all set up to anticipate if there are any things that come up that aren't ideal, so that you're not just depending on things being perfect. And you know, if you are anticipating what could go wrong, the chances are you're going to head off that potential in some way, because you're going to have your contingency. Now Libra, for you, of course, the sign of Taurus shares the commonality with you as having the ruler of Venus. So we need to look at where Venus is for you. And it's in house 9, which is very much about the truth in relationships, but it is being compromised by Saturn in the part of your scope to do with work. So I feel your work and obligations can get on top of you a little bit with Venus compromise like that. In terms of Mercury itself, strictly, anything to do with investments, mortgages, pensions, legacies, inheritances, property, transactions, all of those things are going to be very much to the fore. There's definitely opportunities, but I think things can be very fluid and changeable, as they will be for us all collectively, but particularly around those areas. Because the 8th house can be where things are concealed, some things can come out. If you get a document, you need to scrutinize it really carefully, because there could be some small print or some kind of snag that's not immediately obvious. Very classic 8th house. The other area that's going to require some care is shared finances. So if you're working collaborative in a business or even in a personal context, having real clear terms of reference that both sides can relate to, very important indeed. Now Scorpio, for you, all this energy is in your sector of relating, but Uranus has been bringing a degree of unpredictability since 2019 March, those 5 months in 2018, just depends where your sun is. If your sun's early in Scorpio, you will have felt Uranus's impact a lot more strongly over recent years. If your sun is later in Scorpio, you're going to have the pleasure over the next couple of years. But this event does suggest that you could have a charismatic connection to someone totally unexpectedly, and you may be totally dazzled by them. Remember, Mercury is about communication, and in the 7th house it's urging you to be more detached, to hear what the other person says, to work on your listening skills. Someone could push back against you if they feel you're not listening, particularly with your modern ruler Pluto in that very tense right angle with the Sun in 0 degrees in Taurus. So your skills as a listener and as a conversationalist are really going to be spotlighted during this next 7 or 8 weeks. And I feel that if you're single, you could have more than one connection with someone, and it really wouldn't be a surprise if it was through an online app of some kind or dating site, because of the technological dimension of Uranus in your 7th house. But that may be something you've tried out already. You may have already rejected it. Another way that you could approach things if you want to meet people is through hobby groups, that a hobby that you have a mutual connection to someone, or even sport, whether it's local badminton club or squash club or tennis club. That's a great way with 7th house energy to have a contact with people, but share some kind of interest which you both enjoy, and that's a way to get to know people. Meetup groups as well can also be a fun and more informal way of reaching out without necessarily exposing yourself to a date in a way that can be quite challenging, I think, online dating. It seems to me that, from what people tell me, that it's really quite challenging at times, but of course it does have opportunities, and people do meet online, so be conscious of that. But I think in an existing relationship, a partner may be pushing you to update your approach, especially if you are someone who really is stuck in your ways, to be honest. And because you're a fixed sign, and Taurus is a fixed sign, if you resist, then it could create quite a lot of tension. So I think being open to compromise a little bit more, whether it's about domestic duties, about the time you spend on your own interests, or the time you want to spend with a partner. Maybe the partner wants more space with Uranus on this Mercury position, but a conversation needs to be had. Sagittarius, all of this stuff occurs in house 6 for you, suggesting changes come in around your work or daily routines, your life structure. A great time to get more organised at home. If you are someone who's a bit of a hoarder, I'm not saying you are, if you have a real sort out and recycle to a charity shop the things you don't want, that would be a very noble thing to do. Or perhaps sell off the stuff if you need the money, and that will create more air around you and a more practical, organised vibe, which can be very valuable. But I think there could be some mixed messages around your work. There may be a push to use technology more around your work, or you may just decide that you want a complete change in terms of the type of employment that you want, and there can be a lot of to-ing and fro-ing, a lot of conversations about that over the next few weeks. Capricorn, for you, Mercury retrograde is in the 5th house of sociability, but also where you express your individuality. And Uranus being in this sector in recent years has really been encouraging you to let go of your conservatism a little bit. I do mean with a small c, not politically, but if there's part of you that is really comfortable with the way it's been, you're being asked to be more radical in your approach. So if someone asks you out of the blue to go on a date, meet up with a friend, even if you had plans for that day, think about how by being more flexing, you can actually go and have some fun off the cuff, and you could have a delightful time. But equally, the 5th house is about romance, so it does suggest that there could be some changes. If you're looking to go on some dates, there can be some last minute changes which could prove frustrating at times. Very hard not to take things personally, isn't it, in life? If someone can't make it, it can really have an impact on our trust. Can we really believe them? Are they trying to let us down, or they just don't really care? We live in a world where people seem to use technology to throw away connections in a very frivolous way. But I feel that in terms of your talents and artistic flair, if you've got things in your locker that you're not fully using, I think the next 7 or 8 weeks are really pushing you to take them out, dust them down, and find a fresh way to deploy them, because it will give you a lot of enrichment as an individual. So it can be a real growth spurt this next 7 or 8 weeks for your sign in particular. Now, Aquarius, the 4th house in terms of solar astrology, where this event occurs, is very much about where you live, how you live there, and who with. It can also be your immediate environment, so the actual location, whether you live in a busy city or a quiet countryside, residency, or something in between. Whether you like a degree of space in your physical home. That's very, very often true of both Sagittarius and Aquarius people, of needing space, and of course air in your case, to breathe. If it's a little too quiet, a little too busy, we're all unique, everyone's different. Whatever isn't quite working for you, you're going to have to revisit it over the next 7 or 8 weeks. But whatever plan you have, whether it's for rental or purchasing property, it could be subject to quite a lot of false starts, which can be incredibly frustrating. But think of where you're going to be at the end of May, because I feel the information that comes through then, it may start to unravel a little bit before then in an advantageous way to you. But I feel generally you're wanting to improve even where you're living. If you've got no desire to move whatsoever, how can you adapt it a little bit more? Could you put a partition wall in to create more space? Could you take one down? Could you refit your loo or your kitchen to make your house more elegant and work better for you? These are the things that I think you are going to be actively considering. But there may be some stresses, particularly if you're born right at the start of Aquarius, because Pluto's sat there cresting on that first degree. Not even the first degree, it's up to 20 minutes when this event begins, and it's only getting up to about 23 this year, but it is in that direct square with the Sun in Taurus. So there could be a frustration if things aren't unraveling in the way you want. But I feel that that part of you that tends to resist anything that's unjust or unfair is really going to be to the fore. So you're going to be very outspoken over the next 7 or 8 weeks, but it might be nothing to do with where you're living, and it may be much more to do with your emotional world. If you feel that the politics in your family are not very fair, you're going to find your voice in a big way. If we go back to 2018, Mars was on the first couple of degrees of Aquarius in a square with Uranus in those first couple of degrees of Taurus, and that was a seminal time in my situation in terms of separating myself from something that just was not working, and it was very painful, to separate yourself from people you deeply care for. But if they are not really tuned into your needs, your emotional world, then it could be that you're going to create space from anyone who wants your time and attention, perhaps for their own needs, but isn't investing enough in the nurture of you. Those kind of dynamics are going to be something you're grappling with over the next 7 or 8 weeks too. Which brings us, as always, to Pisces, last but definitely not least. For you, this can be really exciting, because, of course, the third house where this event occurs is very Gemini-like. So I feel you're going to have lots of different buzzy ideas. I feel there could be some greater interaction with siblings and neighbours. Maybe there could be some cross wires. I feel of all the signs, you may have a little bit of a problem with your mode of transport. I'm not saying it's going to go completely wrong, but it may need to be serviced. There may be an electrical part because Uranus is in the mix that needs changing, like a fuse or light bulb. Perhaps you will consider an electric vehicle, or perhaps one of those scooters. Could be really exciting, because the third house, very much to do with cycling, scootering, short, quick journeys, skateboarding, very exciting. Lots of buzz around you. And I feel that Saturn was really suppressing your interaction with other people in quite a big way over the last few years, perhaps seeing you quite retreated. Now, I know Pluto is on that first point of Aquarius, and that could have an impact, but if you're born early in the sign of Pisces, I think Saturn's much more the deal for you this year. If you're born towards the end of the sign of Pisces, you're still in a lovely sextile with Pluto. So I don't think Pluto is quite the issue yet, but I think Saturn can be. So for those early born Pisces people. But yeah, I feel that you need extra mental stimulation. If your life has become a little bit too focused on work or routines, you're being asked to rethink. Also, the third house can be to do with our belief systems, which is a bit different from our values, because I think our values are perhaps more to do with money, more to do with innately what's deeply us. The third house is more what we think are our values, because our mind is involved, our intellect. So we may say this is what we believe in, but how we actually react when something affects us directly is probably more to do with the sentiment point, and that's more Taurus for me. But certainly a lot of chit chat. If you are someone who's got ideas that you want to share with people, a lot of enthusiasm can be going around. But your technology, I would back files up. If you don't use the cloud, consider it. If that's all a bit high tech for you, you could plug in an external drive and just make sure that all your files are backed up on your device, because the third house Mercury retrograde could lead to some glitches around devices, but you may also decide to upgrade them and get something that is more appealing to you. But certainly a lot of buzz around you on this next 7 or 8 weeks, Pisces. It's been a real pleasure being with you. If you would like to understand how serious astrology can really have an impact on your situation, please do give me those 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth. I can prepare for you your life roadmap report, but also in my special package, your 12-month personal forecast. No 2 charts are the same, totally unique to you, and can give you serious insights. And also, if you don't know your time of birth, I've set up a new package which is based on your sun, doesn't use the ascendant, has a nominal moon position at midday, and actually is proved to be incredibly popular because it gives people something to relate to based on these sun sign videos. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Please do like, subscribe or comment. Take care and goodbye.